So, recently, I've been playing a game called Lunacid. Released last month in March, Lunacid is a first-person dungeon crawler inspired by older From Software titles like Kingsfield and Shadow Tower. And I really love Shadow Tower, especially its sequel, Abyss, which I covered nearly 5 years ago now, which left me eager to experience more games like it. Since making that video, I've made no progress on that thought whatsoever, so way to go, LEXX, really dropped the fucking ball on that one. So I guess Lunacid will be a pretty good place to start. Before we dive into the video proper though, it's worth stating that Lunacid is currently an early access title, and I bought it like a week after it came out, which is pretty much as early into that early access as you can really be. So bear in mind that if you're watching this in the future, which realistically you probably are, seeing that's how time works, that some stuff I talk about in this video might be outdated or irrelevant if you decide to play the game later down the line. I mean, some of it will probably be outdated before the video is even out. That's just kind of the nature of early access titles. So think of this video as an early first impressions look at what the game is about and what I like about it. Just a chill time talking about the game for 15 minutes. That's the type of vibe I'm going for anyway. I also compare the game a lot to Kingsfield and Shadow Tower, obviously, so knowing something about those games would also probably help going into this. But I think I cover enough here, you'll be able to get the feel for them by what I'm saying and what you're seeing on screen. Now, with all that out of the way, let's actually talk about Lunacid. Developed by Kira, the same team behind games like Lost in Vivo and Spooky's House of Jump Scares, Lunacid is a first-person dungeon crawler, as already repeated by me enough times in this video, heavily inspired by From Software's earlier titles a la Kingsfield, Shadow Tower and Eternal Ring. What this means then is you skulking your way through dark tunnels, scavenging for equipment and spells, and engaging enemies in slow, methodical battles. I've always wanted a modern interpretation of those older From Software games, Shadow Tower Abyss in particular being one of my favourite PS2 games, but it was also the last in this style that From Software would develop. Them going on to hit it big with a little known title you may have heard of, The Adventures of Cookie and Demon Souls. But actually Adventures of Cookie and Cream. The older titles are still good of course, from what I've played of them, but you really have to be in the mood for them. The best way I could describe the vibe of those early Kingsfield games are they basically play and are designed like their NES games that just happen to be in 3D. So have the same sort of barrier of entry something like an old school NES RPG might entail. Combat was very slow, enemies hit hard, environments are dark, easy to get lost in, and are booby-trapped. Death can come as swiftly and easily as walking the wrong way at the start of the game, or even just walking straight forward after starting the game. They really like to mess with you like that, and dying is punishing, sending you screaming back to wherever you last saved, which was probably an hour ago because of how slowly you walk, or if not that, 5 seconds ago cause it's literally the start of the game. Shadow Tower Abyss, on the other hand, offered a more streamlined approach to this style of gameplay, with much faster combat and guns. And I'm happy to say that Lunacid continues and builds on top of this. Combat is still purposely quite slow and methodical, but not painfully so, and a modern control scheme with a faster camera speed definitely helps make it a lot better to play. You know, there's a lot less of this going on. However, it is obviously still early access, and there are definitely some gameplay issues here. I got stuck in a wall at one point, jumping somewhere I wasn't meant to. Weapons like the crossbow absolutely dominate, as they have unlimited ammo, letting you fight basically anything in the game from across the map with no danger. And magic is very broken right now. Though there is a really nice variety in the types of spells you can get, really, only a handful of them actually seemed that helpful to me. The two most easily abused spells being Flame Flare, which you get real early in the game, and Summon Fairy. The former places a flame on the ground that damages anything that stands on it, and the latter summons a fairy who hangs out with you for like a minute or so, who can also cast magic spells. But there's no limit on how many of these you can summon at once, so when I figured this out, it was really trivial to just place like 20 flames down at once to basically insta-kill anything that walked into it, or summon several fairies to clear out entire areas without even seeing the enemies, because they can also shoot through walls. So there's definitely some balancing to be done here, but the foundation of the combat is very solid. It's thoughtful, if that makes sense. You rarely go in just blindly mashing, you need to think about how you approach enemies. Landing hits is satisfying, and it even features limb severing like in Shadow Tower, though for the most part, most enemies in the game don't actually seem to care if they have a head or not. All that said though, it's not like Lunacid is just copying from software one-to-one either. Kira has injected their own personal touches and influences into the game as well, and all positive ones too, that make the game stand out way more than had it just solely rode the whole Kingsfield nostalgia train. Some weapons you come across can be leveled up into stronger versions of themselves once their weapon XP bar has been maxed out. I like the more niche spells like Coffin that lets you just literally summon a coffin, which you can then scale to find secret areas. I also really like the range of characters you meet in the game too, straying from the traditional Dark Souls affair of a random guy saying the most cryptic shit you've ever heard and then laughing at you. By far and away the coolest character in the game being Clive, a skeleton who you never see anywhere apart from at the bar, recounting the world's lore at you like he's a grandpa telling a story to his grandchildren, and is only kept alive by the fact he chronically drinks health potions like I drink estrogen. And I mean, relatable. Same actually. Going back to magic again for a moment, the game has a mechanic called Lunacy, which builds up as you cast spells, and once you reach 100%, your spells will do more damage, but you'll take more damage in return. On top of this, the rate at which Lunacy builds up is tied to the real-world phase of the moon, which is really cool, at least in theory I think. Truth be told, Lunacy had no bearing on me whatsoever during my playtime, as when I played through the game it happened to be at the end of the lunar cycle, so my Lunacy didn't build up at all from what I could really see. It sounds like it would be a cool mechanic, and would probably introduce some risk-reward to using spells, though as it is right now, I didn't engage with the mechanic at all during my playtime. The meter may as well not have been there. There's also crafting in the form of alchemy, where you can combine enemy drops together to make weapons out of them. However, I can tell you absolutely nothing about it, as early into my playthrough I picked up a glitched, empty item which stopped the game from showing any other items I was picking up. Thankfully it only impacted enemy materials, so the rest of my inventory was accessible no problem, but it's unfortunate that I was effectively locked out of this portion of the game, as none of the items I had before picking up the broken one were combinable in any way. I think then it's fair to say that Lunacid is a game with really good ideas, some of them well implemented, and once more development is done on it, taking the game out of early access, those half or not at all implemented ideas are going to add to the game really nicely. But probably the coolest injection of their own ideas Kira did for this game are the bits where randomly, out of nowhere, it will become a horror game. I kinda love this. How suddenly the game's tone can change from to something a bit more like it comes out of nowhere, but gives the game a flavour of its own, really helping it take the game out of Shadow Tower's shadow. The oppressive darkness only being cut through by your torch or light spells, the stereo panning audio that tricks you into thinking something is just behind you at any time, how you need to swap to your weapon to fight any of the enemies down here, meaning you're often left swinging in complete darkness or the faint blue light of your luminance spell if you have one. It's really, really good. Constantly had me on edge whenever one of these sections popped up. And speaking of the enemies, you know, when you can see them, sure, it will sometimes fall back on classic staples of the genre, like the obligatory slime, and sometimes it pays homage to the games it's paying homage to, as you all no doubt noticed as you were just wondering why I was being attacked by a Titanite demon a moment ago. There's even the little Venus flytrap things from Kingsfield here. It's cute. But outside of those, you have really cool and unique stuff like the Yakul. That are the guardian spirits of the forest. The enlightened ones, which are like the nervous systems of our bodies floating ominously in the air. And then, probably my favourite, the absolutely terrifying mummified corpses of monks towards the start of the game, who were so desperate to escape from the dark cave they are trapped in, that their brains literally crawled out from inside their skull, leaving the corpses with this large gaping hole where their faces should be. Kira's origins as a horror game developer shines through, and I love how they embraced that and truly turned the game into something special, rather than just more Kingsfield, which I would have also totally been fine and okay with, but it was these horror moments that really made me want to sit down and talk about the game. Equally matching the design of the enemies are the areas you adventure through. The game has a real nice style to it. Definitely PS1 inspired, and you can even lean into this more with some optional graphic settings if you'd like, but even default, it looks dang good. Like a PS2 game, but in a complimentary, cool way, not an annoying gamer on Twitter kinda way, if you catch my drift. The fonts, the HUD, the sound effects, the Windows XP looking ass cursor trail, it all comes together to invoke that sort of era, and I fell in love with it. You'll catch me at several points in my recordings of this game, just stopping to take a screenshot to post on Twitter so I could gush about how it looks. And from the claustrophobic, tight, winding caverns of the accursed tomb, to the vast, oppressive Sanguine Sea, and the quiet, almost dreamlike atmosphere of the Forbidden Archives, where pages fall from the sky like leaves in the wind, every area feels like a breath of fresh air after the last, often offering something new, gameplay or layout-wise. And their actual level design is great. I found the game easier to navigate than something like Shadow Tower, where I felt inclined to draw out my own maps to make sure I never got lost. Maybe with the exception of the Sanguine Sea, which is honestly it's just way too big. Like, it doesn't need to be this big. The areas aren't so massively sprawling that you're likely to get lost in them, and all offering little shortcuts you can find, kinda Dark Souls style, that can get you back to the nearest save point. Helping add to the vibe of each area as well is the music, as well as the 3 composers who worked on the game, all lending their own style to it. Kira, the main developer and composer, is responsible for all the horror tracks in the game, and are suitably terrifying, but I also love their calmer songs too. They often start off quite sad and melancholic sounding, reflecting the dark caves you spend the whole game exploring, but with a melody that carries through the song, sounding hopeful. Like, hey, you might actually escape the cave one day. Jaren Christ's songs are more reflective, somber, depressing, focusing mainly on piano, which pairs really nicely with the Sanguine Sea, which is an area whose vast space gives you a lot of time to think to yourself and reflect on the game so far, wondering when you'll get to leave and go back to a better area. But the music does make the sea worth it. Lastly, there's YouTube good boy 4 High Heels, whose music fucking slaps. I don't have anywhere close enough to a good musical vocabulary to describe what I love about this music, but god damn. Makes the area stand out so much more than had it gone for traditional video game library music. You know, whatever that sounds like. Fucking love his music. Them's the only boots you'll ever catch me licking, I'll tell you that. Don't be weird. So, I guess last but not least, before I start to wrap up, let's talk about the start of the game, the story and character creation. The story of Lunacid, to put it really bluntly, is really cool. A giant beast rose from the waters of Earth one day and spread a poisonous fog in its wake. Society collapsed, animals became vicious, and humankind split into disparate small kingdoms. I guess turned bitter and mean about the whole world-ending thing, the survivors decided that rather than deal with anyone who's sick, dead, or really just anyone they didn't like, they would be chucked into a massive fuck-off hole in the ground. The character you create being someone chucked into this hole, and the goal of the game is to crawl your way back out, presumably not to whatever village chucked you into the hole in the first place. I absolutely love this concept. It's like the logical inversion of what Shadow Tower was, and not even a hint of irony here, is what I'd consider my perfect plot for a game like this. That's not even a joke. I don't know if anyone else does this, but as someone too talentless and lazy to learn a skill as intimidating as making a game, or, well, really any skill to be honest, it's a miracle I even know how to edit a video together, when playing a game I often find myself story crafting in my head, imagining what I would have done differently if I had made it, or imagining what my own interpretation of the game's setup and genre would look like. And being devoid of any skills to actually bring these ideas to life, my Google Docs has basically become a graveyard of game pitches and world building, because I find writing it all down really fun. More fun than trying to learn how fucking Unity works, probably. And after first discovering Kingsfield, I did just that, and lo and behold, last edited May 2016, there's a giant pit in the middle of a coliseum that the corrupt leader of a kingdom throws people into for their entertainment, and you are someone thrown into this pit who survives the fall and need to crawl your way back out. Lunacid is literally my ideal Kingsfield game, almost as if plucked straight out of my head. So I guess now I don't need to learn anything complicated like Unity to make my own idea now that it actually exists. Which is a shame because, you know, after 6 years, I was almost getting around to clicking the download button. Then after the opening cutscene, it's time to make your character, where you can pick your starting class and your appearance from a selection of very coherent and art style consistent character portraits, which I was originally going to bring up as a flaw, but remembering this game was made by the same devs as Scoopy's House of Jumpscare, that's just what it's called now, where a clashing and contrasting art style is definitely part of the overall aesthetic of the game, means, well, it isn't really a flaw here at all. Maybe a bit weird, but it's also just an image you see in the inventory screen, so who really cares? There's lots of starting classes to choose from as well, but ultimately it doesn't really matter which one you pick, the only real difference between them all being that each starts with a different item in their inventory. Equipment doesn't have stat requirements like in Dark Souls either, so it's not like leveling one way or another really locks you out of anything, and the most points any of these classes have is like 15, which is how many skill points I got to spend the first time I leveled up anyway. So very quickly, no matter what class you pick, you'll be able to easily veer into whatever type of character you want to play, making the class selector basically a glorified footstep sound selector, and even then you can change that in the menu whenever you want to. I feel like for a lot of this video, I came across as quite critical, which is maybe to be expected. Being in early access and unfinished, bugs and problems were bound to be part of the experience, and I expected that, and don't bring them up here to hurt the game or make you think poorly of it. Rather just highlight them so you are aware going in, and maybe on the very slim off chance the developer sees this. But what those problems don't detract from is the core of this game, and the core of Lunacid, I think, is absolutely incredible. The developers have made such a good modern take on the classic Kingsfield game style, and their own original ideas elevate it to even greater levels. It has easily jumped to the top of the list of my most anticipated games coming out, despite obviously already being out, but you know what I mean, and I think if you're a fan of either Kingsfield, or even any of the Sekiro Soulsborne rings, or whatever we have to call them now, there is plenty here for you to enjoy too. Took me about 6 hours to see everything the game has to offer right now, so consider it like a very generous demo. And now that I've played it, I'm going to be hotly anticipating the game's full release. For the price it is right now, I cannot recommend it highly enough. I'd like to give a massive thank you to 4 High Heels for taking the time out of his day and recording that silly little line for me earlier in the video. if you can call making a silly noise into the mic a line.
Ooh!
You didn't have to do that, but thank you for being so cool and doing it for me anyway. This was the first bit of non-Paw Patrol content I've done in, like, what, 5 years now, since the release of that last Shadow Tower video. Let me know if you want to see any more. I have other ideas for non-Paw Patrol content I could do in the future, and I think it would be nice to mix it up every now and then. Might stop me from getting so formulaic with Paw Patrol content, which I feel like I accidentally do sometimes. So yeah, let me know what you think. And if you do want to know any more about the Kingsfield / Shadow Tower / Eternal Ring series, take a look at that old Shadow Tower Abyss video I did. It's a bit old now, so you have to listen to cringy old boy LEXX voice. I especially loved the bit of the video where I point out the in-game currency is unfortunately named in such a way that it's pronounced like a racial slur, and then say its name a few times for comedic effect. That bit makes me cringe so much now, but so much of the video, like, it's such a important part of the video that I can't really edit around it, so apologies for that. I should have probably known better, but I know better now, not making excuses for my past self. So yeah, thank you. I don't know how to end these bits. I didn't even script this. Goodbye, I guess. That'll do. Goodbye. Okay, stop it now.